I'll ask the first bishop of Eastern Michigan the first question.
Age before beauty.
There you go.
Okay. So I think my first origin story would be meeting with people and hearing their expectations for a new day, a new kind of diocese. Excitement was part of that story. Anticipation was a part of that story. There was a lot of hope, and it was really invigorating. I mean, I loved it. I just loved it. And then when I got elected, and I didn't really expect to be elected, I had this call from Jack Carlson, and I was more or less speechless. But then there was a sense of fear and joy that comes, I guess, to any bishop or elect anybody to a public office. This diocese where phoniness was not respected, kind of a blue-collar, working-class diocese overall, not completely, but a diocese that had energy and they wanted to do something new. Is there an Eastern Michigan leader that you draw particular inspiration from?
Just one?
It's a hard question.
It's a very hard question because there's so many. In the clergy ranks, Chuck Stewart, a man of deep faith, pastoral sensibility, of flexibility, of a sense of his call to service. And even though he served as rector of one of the largest and wealthiest congregations in the diocese, in retirement, so willing to serve places on the edge and to be present with them, not just as a Sunday supply, but as somebody who was there to marry and to bury and to baptize and to lead through confirmation classes, to be at the end of a phone call when there was a need. And I also think about the late John Roberts, longtime master of liturgies, verger as it were, at St. Paul's Flint, was attentive to every detail, the picture of hospitality. You know, the list could go on and on of lay leaders and clergy leaders, but those are the two that really come to mind.
One name that comes to mind is Sue Calvinzenzo.
Oh, yeah.
When I knew her as a layperson, who was very committed, but she also, in many ways, opposed some of my liberal ideas at the beginning. So we spent a lot of time talking together, and then to see how she grew and became a priest, and now is the chair of COM in the diocese. Right. I mean, I just see her journey. But there are just, as you said, there are just so many.
But Ed, how have you felt Eastern Michigan's spirit of creativity and innovation in your own ministry?
I think the challenges that Eastern Michigan had, particularly in those first 5 years when we talked about vision, vision, vision all the time, to create an own vision, to name it, to own it, to live it, to pay for it. I myself was challenged to grow in my own spirituality. What does a diocese look like that it isn't so much an institution, but a community where people really care for one another and have accepted their identity as the living Christ? That's that's what the church is always meant to be, but we failed so badly over the years.
I remember you're going on sabbatical and coming back and you'd done some writing and reflection and an embrace and an interest in Celtic spirituality.
Oh, yes.
But when you brought that back to the diocese, what I saw was a real merger of your own sense of spirituality and a spirituality that had not been articulated for the diocese, but really was who they are. Not that sort of linear, top-down, rigid kind of spirituality, but that Celtic kind that can perhaps walk in circles, but know that it's walking in circles with a purpose.
Yeah. I mean, it's so earthy. It's so grassroots. I mean, even the cross that they use is made out of straw, dead grass that gives life to the world. I never really knew or sensed what effect that had on the diocese, to be really honest with you. But it certainly had an effect on me. Where do you see the future of the Episcopal Church at large?
Wow, I did not bring my crystal ball with me today. I think a lot is made of the church in decline, and certainly our numbers of baptized members and our Sunday attendance figures, those are down. There's no doubt about that. And many people despair on that, and I don't celebrate it. But what I see happening right now is that the Episcopal Church is going through a period of its own disestablishment. It's moving away from an attitude that's a historical inheritance of being an established church, or the closest thing to an established church.
The wealthiest church.
The wealthiest church, the church of the president, all of those kinds of things. And really finding its authentic self. And getting back to much of what I think was a part of the revitalization in England with the Oxford movement. That was a marriage of our liturgical traditions and our social justice traditions. Our presiding bishops over time have led us into a consciousness of that. And I see right now, both under Catherine Jefferts Schori and increasingly under Michael Curry, that the church is returning to those social justice and liturgical roots and the interplay between those two, and finding a new kind of vitality. I think it is producing a deeper engagement with gospel, with vitality, and that deeper engagement with gospel values. As our presiding bishop says in many ways, if it's not about love, it's not about God.
I love it.
And I think that's
so basic, so real.
Yeah, and I think that's where we are right now. So I'm very hopeful about the future, and I see that as I travel around the church, that there's evidence of it everywhere I go.
And what I love now with Michael and you, and is that you got to have the newspaper in one hand, as neighbor said, and the Bible in the other.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
I think it's fun.
What does it mean to be bishop in Eastern Michigan?
Well, I expect that changes over time. When I became a bishop, there was one thing. When you became a bishop, I think it shifted a little bit. My emphasis was the mutuality thing has never gone away. But I think the emphasis on vision and leadership, we did a lot of that. Maybe overdid it almost. We kind of burned it out.
In my time as bishop, I came to an understanding of discernment as being something that's the intersection of vocation and location being both physical place, but also that context and that moment in time. And I think something you said here is really important, that what the diocese needed as a bishop when you were elected was not necessarily the same thing when I was elected. And it's not necessarily the same thing now. In fact, I'm confident that it's not. I think when you were elected, we needed somebody who clearly had an entrepreneurial spirit, who was not just a cheerleader, but was the head cheerleader, an encourager, a Barnabas in our midst, someone who was willing to risk, to try this program this week and that program next week. And you talked about all the vision conferences and the leadership development we did, and we were exhausted. But
people told me that.
Yes, but it was a good exhaustion. And I think when I came in, there was a sense that it was time for us to take all of these learnings and all of these experiences and sort through and focus in on a few of those and begin to not institutionalize in a way that is rigid and inflexible, but to build a little bit more of the structure. And I think now the diocese is moving into a time when it has to imagine a different kind of future, but a future that is consistent with what they've always done, and that is to recognize they're a particular place, they're a particular location, and they're located in a different moment in time now. And to discover what their calling, what their vocation is at this moment is the critical piece. It's a process of discovery that I think they're embracing.
The DNA theoretically doesn't change too much.
Right.
Have you experienced any miracles?
Have I experienced any miracles?
Quote unquote miracles.
Oh, wow. Yeah. When you're working with a congregation, you're looking for hope and desperately seeking that hopeful moment, and you just can't find it. When it actually turns and there is hope. And St. John the Baptist, Otter Lake, you sent me out there to have a conversation with them, and not to close them down, but to have a real heart-to-heart about what their future is.
This was a mutual ministry time.
This was when they were discerning that piece, whether they were going to go that direction. I didn't see much hope, and they fought me on it. My lack of hope produced a stubbornness in them that led to their embracing a new way of ministry and embracing it with everything that they had to offer and becoming in many ways a model congregation. Well, and I think that was also a good moment for me to really reflect on something that you were teaching, that we try something, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, well, let's try the next good idea, or harebrained idea, or just any old idea. Let's just try something. And that opens up the possibility that you don't have to give up hope, but rather you just keep looking for it.
Right.
What brought you to church for the first time?
My parents. Dad was the Episcopalian who had experienced close to death in his own life with tuberculosis. And in the midst of all of that, he joined the Episcopal Church. He really wanted to be a priest himself, but I think it was my dad's spirituality, his humility actually, thirst for what's real in life. He was my saint.
I don't remember a time when I wasn't in church. I think that it's fair to say that the moment or moments when I really embraced my faith was when I was in high school and I was involved in Young Life. I was a lapsed Southern Baptist involved with this parachurch organization and got invited to be a part of the small group Bible study that met weekly. That's when I really began to... Small community. Began to wrestle with scriptures, permission to do that wrestling. And so then when as a college student, I encountered the Episcopal Church, I found an institutional home that said it was okay to wrestle with scripture. And I knew it was the place for me.
My real turning point was in college and joined a fraternity. I had to go through this rush period.
Yeah.
You heard the story?
No, I haven't.
I told the brothers, this is stupid, which probably was not a good thing to say.
Not if you wanted to get into the fraternity, right?
And I was the last one. There were like 15 of us, and they called me in last. That should have been a clue. And it was in the sort of the inner sanctum of the bar downstairs where the beer was, and these lights shining on you so you couldn't see the brothers out there. And they began to tell me what an awful person they thought I was. And I just broke down. I started to cry. And I remember walking out of that place and walking around the streets of Madison and ending up in the chapel at St. Francis House where I was my room and board. And that was the beginning of the crushing of a false self and the awakening of a new one. And I began to seriously think about, instead of being a physicist, about being a priest. One of you felt in a groove with the wider diocesan community.
I felt in the groove with the Diocese of Eastern Michigan most clearly when together we discerned that we needed to create a diocesan school for ministry. It would focus on the ministry of all the baptized, but in particular to prepare ordained leadership for our congregations. If I had it all to do over again, knowing how it resulted, I'd probably do it the same way. The smarter part of me says I did it all wrong because I dreamed it up that we needed to do that, and I put it in my bishop's address to convention, and the first time anybody heard it was when it came out of my mouth at the convention. And I said we'd get it up and starting by the next school year. I didn't have a clue whether we could do that or not, but it resonated within the diocesan leadership, and by golly, we had our first class. That was a moment of really feeling like I was in sync with the diocese. You know, and I think the other time when I felt in a groove with the diocese was when we voted in convention to live outside the diocesan canons and experiment structurally, procedurally, canonically, and to do that for a period of time to discover how we needed to reshape our canon. For a lot of people, that was uncomfortable. That's not canonical. Well, no, it wasn't. And then there were people who were concerned that we weren't moving quickly enough. And I always felt like we would know when it was time to present canons to the diocese and vote on them. And by the time we did, a couple years later, we had a special convention. We convened at First Presbyterian in Saginaw. We had lunch organized to be delivered. So we convened, we got ourselves organized, called roll, did all of that. We put the resolution before the convention, we were done in about 15 or 20 minutes. And we had to sing songs, tell stories, kill some time so that we could stay there long enough to have lunch together. And that's a moment when we were in sync. Now, we weren't all together on every piece, but as a community, we knew we needed to make some changes, and we got it done.
I think that's what leaders today need to be permission givers. Really huge.
Rather than regulatory authorities.
Exactly.
What are the most important lessons you've learned in ministry?
I've made so many mistakes, so I've had a lot of learning opportunities. You know, Rabbi Edwin Friedman, may inevitably come back to his three things that he talked about in terms of leadership. And the first one was to stay self-differentiated.
Right.
Be who you really are. Don't be a pleaser. Be a loving advocate of the stance that you have with humility. The second thing that goes along with that is to keep your door open. Always be accessible. Exude a sense of hospitality in who you are. And the third thing that Friedman talks about, and that's the hardest one of all, he talks about being a person of faith. He talks about staying connected to something that's greater than you are, to your source. What aspect of the community of Eastern Michigan do you wish the wider church understood better?
Well, it's interesting because in the role I have now, I'm going to the canons all the time. I have a copy at home, I have a copy on my desk at the office, and I've got a copy that's in my bag in the car.
I'm so glad you're doing that.
I think one of the things that Eastern Michigan taught me is that the interesting part of the canons, the interesting part of the church's rules and regulations, is not the written word, it's the white space in between the lines. What the words imply, or what the words leave unstated, is something that you can work with. And it's in those places that we can find, without violating the canons, an opportunity to be church in a different way, to structure ourselves in a different way.
Yeah, some of the canons are very good, you know.
Right.
The canons are not meant to be a in stone forever kind of document. It's meant to be a living document.
Ed, how do you think your ministry would be different if Eastern Michigan had not been created?
All I know is that Eastern Michigan was such an important part of what I've become. And I'm so thankful for those 10 years. God, they were just so wonderful. I mean, to have the opportunity to engage in the creation of a brand new diocese that really wanted to be something different, Eastern Michigan really helped that to happen inside of me.